The entire reason that Atari created the Atari 2600 home console was to put their arcade hits into the home. If we can sell home versions of our arcade hit games into the home, we can sell.
Distinction is this. Coin-Up gets to use more expensive hardware. They get to use tons and tons of hardware, and they get to refresh their hardware all the time.
I had played an Outlaw-like game in the arcade. I think it was Midway. And I was just told to make a game, so I said, well, here's an idea, two guys shooting at each other. And so I made that game. My goal is to try to make it like the arcade game, so I can look at the arcade game and say, this is what it has to do. So there really wasn't any need for me to have communication with the arcade guys. I'm particularly proud of the Atari 2600 Canyon Bomber because it also has the Atari arcade game Depth Charge in it. So it turns out that in a 2K byte Atari 2600 cartridge, I simulated both Canyon Bomber and Depth Charge, which were probably $3,000 arcade game hardware.
When I was young, when I was little, I remember there was this drugstore, and in their comic book rack, they had these abridged versions of great literature. You'd read it, and it was the whole story of Treasure Island. War and Peace, a comic book. But that whole notion of an abridged version, that is what was going to happen.
When I did Donkey Kong, I had, not surprisingly, absolutely no contact with Nintendo. Coleco was able to get me a machine. So I had a machine that I could play and look at, and I had already played the game. And like David said, with Canyon Bomber, the game is the spec. Frankly, the hardware is so different in its capabilities that I can't think of any value I would have had getting in touch with anybody at Nintendo. It's like talking to the guy who created the Porsche Carrera about making a bicycle. I mean, it's like, there's not a lot there. Not a lot you're going to tell me. Here's this masterpiece and do it on this toaster, and I was young enough and stupid enough to not be intimidated. And I wasn't, because I was just a kid. And I was like, no big deal.
So one of the first questions they asked me at Atari was, what do you want to work on? So I just said to him, I said, what's the dirtiest, most basic elemental system that you have? And he goes, oh, well, that's the VCS. And I said, well, that's where I want to start.
I mean, the constraints on the programmers were worse than I ever even imagined were possible.
2600 doesn't draw a screen. It doesn't draw anything. What it does is it has these little logic devices, these counters and shift registers that say, this is the start of the screen, this is the left side of the screen. the electron beam is moving to the right. I'm going to count. I know how fast the electron beam is moving. I'm going to count until the electron beam is somewhere on the screen, and then I'm going to change the color on the screen for a little itsy bit.
There's only one console where you have to think about the electron gun moving across the screen and what machine cycle you're on and when you can show stuff on the screen. That's such a fun and unique and annoying challenge that it really hooks you.
It's the most fun I've ever had making a game. What do you say, Dave?
Fun might not be the word. It is the most challenging thing you could do. When we were doing it at Atari and at Activision, there were fewer than 100 people in the world who could do what we were doing. And that in itself was, very positive, very uplifting. It's really a sense of accomplishment. If you can create something that, a million people love on this horribly limited piece of hardware, you've created something. You have a sense of accomplishment.
And there are very few things more technical challenging than trying to get a game out of the VCS in the first place, because the VCS is a very technically limited machine. It sounds like a fabulous thing, and when it first came out it was, because people had never seen anything like it.
I don't know if other people are as rewarded by it, but you're overcoming tremendous challenges. There's nothing that's easy to do on the 2600. And you're winning, right? I love winning.
And the other thing that's fun about playing them still is that they're all 60 frames a second. They have to hit that or the screen won't draw, So they're all even much better than I think consoles that came out a few years afterwards. They all feel really fast when you play them. No Atari game has any sort of lag or anything because they had no option to have lag.
It's like when today, in hindsight, people criticize the first screen of Donkey Kong on the 2600. When I finished that screen, I thought it was a miracle. And you get people on Facebook today saying it's the biggest piece of junk I ever saw. And you just have to understand the perspective of where you were at the time.
The programmers that worked with that machine were magicians.
When you have a tragedy, and I do believe that the fall of the video game industry in the early 80s was a tragedy. It was a tragedy to many, many people. It changed a lot of lives.
I think it's pretty obvious when it comes to the video game crash that Atari didn't have control over the quality.
I mean, it needed some sort of way to keep just anybody from writing cartridges for it.
And so many people saw this video game gold rush, and they just, started dumping crap. I remember going into KB toy stores and just seeing, really bad box art and just really just terrible looking games. And that's when I started losing interest, and the market became flooded just with garbage. And it ultimately led to, of course, things like E.T. being, actually buried in the desert like garbage.
And what happened was that E.T. became the face of the crash of the video game industry. And I, of course, was the butt behind the face. That's kind of the way it went.
Greed and hubris, that's what undid Atari. If they just had worked more from a place of like focusing on making great games and delivering great games to the customer instead of like, how can we maximize revenue, I feel like they'd still be a huge powerhouse today.
Frankly, Warner did not understand technology. They didn't understand the consumer marketplace, the video game, and so Ray Kassar, I think was afraid of releasing new product because it might not be as successful as VCS. So that's a sure way to fail. And
I regret that we didn't have a new console by '84 that would have made it so that Atari continued to be a really viable business.
We never, ever got down to ever having any process by which we could come up with a better system.
Even to say, I think people do believe that, like, if they just released like the 5200 earlier, or if they released the 7800, or they had done different things, they would could never have they would have survived the crash a lot better, and they would be like a powerhouse today. Like as a kid, I didn't know much about business, but I just felt like something was wrong.
No one knew anything. Certainly no one knew how to replace an existing console with a new one.
The real one-liner about why the game industry crashed and went away is that it was a first product life cycle and nobody knew what to do.
there's this funny time period in the history of, if I wrote a book on the history of the video game industry, there's this funny time period where we had left Activision and we went from this fabulous AAA office complex, beautiful. We had more space than we needed by a factor of 5, and we went to the most horrible office in Midland Park, New Jersey, in the basement of an optician's office. Game industry, this was after the crash. Game industry was a disaster. And it was just, oh man, what an office. It was horrible. But we survived in it. I mean, you got to do what you got to do. So anyway, we're in this horrible office, and we're doing C64 stuff at that point. And I get a call from a buddy of mine. Actually, he was our part-time sales guy, and he always visited Toys R Us, and he knew them really well. He called me and said, you know, you're going to laugh, but they want to know if anybody's doing 2600 games. Because at that point, there were none. Nobody was doing them.
But there were 26 million consoles in homes.
And people were going in Toys R Us saying, why don't you sell games for my Atari anymore? So I said, wow, that's interesting. How many would he buy if he had a 2600 game? He said, oh, you know, 20, 30,000 pieces probably. And I said, all right, I'll get back to you. So we did Title Match Wrestling and Super Skateboarding, first 2 titles. I mean, regular skateboarding, first 2 titles. And he loved them, and they sold like crazy. And at that point in time, we were the only people in the world making games on the Atari 2600. My phone rings, and it's the Tramiels. So you did some 2600 games. You know, do a couple for us, because word got around. There's actually a need. And then Activision calls and says, do some 2600 games for us? And I said, well, why don't you guys just do them? He goes, well, you know, if I could be completely honest with you, we don't have anything. We don't have the specs. We don't have manuals. We don't have the equipment. He said, we couldn't make a 2600 game if we wanted to. So could you make something for us? I tell people that, they're like, who the hell wanted 2600 games? You know what? No one told consumers that there had been a crash. No one went to their house and said, you don't like video games anymore. Because that's what Toys R Us and Walmart said. People don't like video games anymore. But the people at home were sitting going, God damn, I'm tired of combat. Isn't there something else I can play on this machine? So it was good. We had a great run there. We had a lot of money off those games.
How's business?
Booming.
Terrific. How do you keep track of your customers?
My Atari 400 home computer. Excuse me, Dad.
Why Atari?
Shopped around. It's a lot of computing capability for such a low price.
You use it a lot?
Sure, life's not all fun and games. There's homework, I even program.
Uh-huh.
Atari has lots of software, not all the others do. And of course, only Atari has games like Centipede.
Games?
Well, we executives have to unwind.
Atari home computers. Only Atari puts so much in it for you.
Bought a home computer, huh?
An Atari 800 home computer. Nothing but the best for my son.
Why Atari?
Atari makes computers that, seem friendly, part of the family.
Want to show off?
Sure, they're real easy. Terrific software, huh?
Nice graphics.
And how do you like this for sound capability?
Impressive.
It sure is.
So what's his first project?
Soon, the alphabet. A is for airplane.
Atari home computers. Only Atari puts so much in it for you.
I think the Atari 400, 800 were really the first home computers that I felt like were designed to be in somebody's home and for an average person to utilize.
Atari, made some interesting decisions over the years. I mean, they were #1 in the world in making video games, but they saw home computers were coming. And Apple II was out, and they said, we got to compete with Apple for, computers. So it came down from on high that we were going to make a computer like the Apple II, but better in some way. But the engineering department said, hey, we're video game people. Why are we doing this? But they were told, you will do this. So what actually happened was the engineers made the Atari 800 into the next best video game player. It had all the sprite capability, it had coprocessors in there. The first GPU in a computer was probably in the Atari 800. All of this stuff was going on in the engineering department, and yet the management thought we were making a computer. We were really just making a video game that we could make cool games on.
My participation was mainly on the prototype pre-production side. We had this very sophisticated, allegedly sophisticated, internal interactive test system called the PIT system that we couldn't get a single unit to pass. Labor Day 1979, can you guys work overtime over the weekend? We need to hand build some production units because we need to put them complete through the entire process. They need to be completely finished, consumer product in the box. We need these for JCPenney's so that they can make the holiday catalog. So we worked, I actually didn't leave Atari for about 3 days, hand building these units. And it was like 4 400s and 4 800s to ship on Monday to JCPenney's. They received them at their warehouse, they took pictures of them for the catalog, and then they immediately shipped them back to us. That was it. That's what we needed to do to get this product out.
My main contribution to the Atari 800 operating system, I created a language similar to PostScript that could draw lines and squares and circles and vector graphics drawn into the bitmap of the Atari 800 and put them into the operating system so that I didn't have to put it in any of my games. So I could borrow from the operating system stuff that I'd put in there and use it when making games. So yes, we were tasked with working on the operating system, but we did it our way. We did it in the video game method.
The idea came up that maybe I could get one of these machines for Christmas, and I thought I was going to get an Apple II because that was what I had at school and what I thought was cool. But I got an Atari, and it was an Atari 800 with a tape cassette drive. At first I was like, oh, it's not an Apple, but it's my own computer. It's super exciting. And then the more I got into it, the more I realized it was so much better than the Apple. probably piss off some Apple people, but it was really an amazing machine. I mean the graphics and sound on it were incredible, and it was a super fun machine to program, and so that was really what got me started.